Thank you guys for joining Duke Robinson Presents Unplugged. I'd like to join, please welcome to the panel, Jonathan Grandchamp, Lavinia, and Ray Watson. Thank you guys for joining me again on the show and spending a little time with me today. So my first question for everybody is, in regards to all of the protesting, Black Lives Matters, you know, the social injustice and the systematic racism and everything that we've been talking about going on, we've been fighting for this through centuries. Businesses, owners, right? A lot of people with wealth and money. Michael Jordan has sent out $100 million to fight against discrimination and racism. NFL teams are sending out $250 million towards racism. And you've got some millionaires throwing money here and there. How does that help us? And where is that money going to?
Yeah, I think it depends on what we're doing with that money. So, you know, for those who don't know me, my background, I'm a human rights lawyer with a focus on anti-Black racism. And the work that I do currently is I help the school board, the Toronto Catholic District School Board, with their policies around anti-Black racism, to how to avoid it, of course, and how to respond when those things happen. So with all the money that's being shoved at anti-Black racism, I think a huge part of it is training. So we want training to uncover people's implicit bias, their unconscious bias, because it's the implicit bias, it's the unconscious bias that tends to inform actions that result in, you know, Black men and Black women losing their lives. And so that's one way. I think another option that we can use is to pump more money into the Black economy. There's tons of people who are trying to create businesses, people who are trying to purchase property. And just because of the systemic barriers that are there, it's oftentimes not possible. That's the word I'm looking for Black people to really get into those spaces. So I think that money can be really used in positive ways, as long as it's infusing, it's planting a seed. It's not just throwing money at the issue.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Yeah, I totally agree with Lavinia. And just to echo her thoughts, for the last couple of weeks, I felt like there was a bandage or a tape that has been lifted off of Black people's mouths. And now we have the ability to finally express how we've been feeling for our whole life and generations before us. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I think it is a good thing that we have these corporations throwing money at us now. Mm-hmm. It's up for the Black community to unite and figure out how do we want to utilize these resources, because I don't think collectively we have come together or have a leader to ask us how do we want to utilize these resources. And I think it's very important that we try to band together at this time as much as we can, because right now we have a lot of silos going on. So we have, you know, these little group discussions that are happening. Right. You're probably talking just to your friends and your family members, but I think we need to just kind of push out of our corners now and say, okay, these corporations, they have an open air. Why has it taken them this long? That's a whole different discussion.
Right.
On its own. I mean, just the other day we heard that Bandied has created multiple shades, and we're like, did it take George Floyd dying? Did it take Trayvon Martin dying for us to get a new shade of a Band-Aid? You have to start questioning those things, but I know that's not what you asked us, Duke.
But it makes sense and it's relevant.
Sorry?
I said it makes sense and it's relevant.
Exactly. And, you know, it's like all of this money now is just coming out of these corporations. You hear even with PayPal, they're offering, you know, small Black businesses grants, and, you know, people are throwing out, okay, I'll design your website for free. I'll take your photo shoot for free. Mm-hmm. And all of these things are coming up. And I think it's important. Yes, we can criticize that these corporations are finally opening up their bag of money and offering it to the Black community. And it's also important for us to utilize it, because, you know, this is an opportunity that we've been given. And I think also to add on to the question that you asked a little bit later, you were saying that, you know, is this going to die down in 6 months? I hope not. I'm holding everybody here that's on this panel tonight accountable to have those uncomfortable conversations. I've been having them all week I work in a very, very corporate environment. And, you know, there's only a handful of us that look like me.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I have to be the courageous Black woman and have those uncomfortable conversations. And, you know, it takes, I think Lavinia said this a little bit earlier too, it's going to take a lot of training. It's going to take somebody who is an expert at talking about unconscious bias, who's an expert at talking about systematic racism, to enter into these spaces. And so I heard Lavinia say occupying spaces. It's so important that we have people that look like us, that think like us, to occupy these spaces and start to educate, because it's going to take us re-educating people who have been ignoring us for our entire lives.
Right. And I think with that, the mindset's going to be a difficult change for people who have been ignoring the Black community for a long time. It's not going to be something that's going to be comfortable and it's going to happen overnight. So what are your thoughts on that?
Sorry, Jonathan, I don't know if you wanted to chime in there.
Yeah, no, like, no, definitely. And I feel like the things, I actually had a conversation with a friend yesterday actually about that. It's not for the things like this, again, like, as we know, this is nothing new. This has been going on for years and stuff like that. And it kind of sucks because when you see a whole bunch of companies, you know, they're just like, oh my God, there's systemic racism, and you just discovered it, but like it's been around, it's been everywhere, right? Mm-hmm. But the thing is, when I was talking to my friend, I was telling her, I'm like, how many people do you think will be comfortable enough to sacrifice their privilege or their comfort in order for another group or in a community to actually have the same equal rights as they do, right? Because you have people who live in communities where they don't see it, they have this little bubble around them that they don't see this discrimination, they don't see the racism and stuff like that. And now that it's actually entering their livelihood and they're seeing it on social media, it's like, how many of them are willing to sacrifice that little safe space that they had to come out to the reality of the world around them? And it will be very hard because a lot of people are not willing to sacrifice their comforts, right? When you have so much comfort, so much protection, stuff like that, and then you realize that could either be taken away, or the fact that you have to be equal to another person who's been going through a whole lot more, a whole lot worse than you, and now you might be subject to that. It doesn't, like, certain people will fight back and lash back against it too, right? So if you think about it in a sense, for example, the people actually scream all lives matter, all that stuff, again, they have this idea that the world that they see is perfectly fine in their own eyes because nothing's happening to them. But the moment that they have to sacrifice their comforts to help us get our own equality, it's just that threshold, that who's willing to actually cross that threshold. And in my mind, I'm hoping a whole lot more people do, but at the same time, I feel like there's still going to be a bit of a disconnect in that sense too.
Right. So you feel that you feel that there's going to be a bit of a pushback as well.
Yes,
I agree. And I think the same too, because I mean, when you have been living through white privilege for most of your life and things have always been granted easy to you, for you to put yourself in a Black person's shoes, I don't think a lot of people are going to want to do that, right? So it's one thing to say that, okay, we're going to be more empathetic towards minorities, Blacks, Indigenous people, and we're going to start, you know, really looking at the way we hire people. But even in the corporate world, and you mentioned corporate, Ray, do we really think that, let's say even a year from now, we'll still be having this conversation and the corporate world will be doing the right thing that they claim that they're going to be doing now?
Well, I'll just jump in and say this. You know, it's important for us as members of society, as members of the Black community, to now hold these corporations accountable. You know, I don't want it to be a repeat of Trayvon Martin passing about 5 years ago. Let's not make that happen, because it's easy for us to get distracted. As you see us living in Ontario, we hear that, you know, the city might open up again in a couple of weeks. And so it's important for us to have a plan in place on how we want to present ourselves back to the world, because we're all in our homes right now.
Right.
And it's time for the city to open up. How do we want to present ourselves? Because like you said, it's going to be easy for us to get distracted.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to get caught up in your work again, caught up in your lifestyle again. And these conversations, unfortunately, will probably die down. There's a possibility, but I am so passionate. I have the drive to keep pushing it. And whoever wants to hop on the bus with me, come along for the ride, because I'm not stopping. I mean, I've been protesting for the last 2 weeks, and I don't want that to be in vain. I do not want to be 80 years old telling people that my life matters, that my children's lives matter. You know, it would be a big, huge disappointment.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, we have to realize that, yes, you're going to be distracted, but you have to be consistent with these conversations. So you're trying to say, okay, what is it going to look like a year from now? I hope it's going to change. I don't want to go back to normal, because normal wasn't working. Normal wasn't working for us, right? And so we can see that now the dynamics have changed. And so we have to make sure that it's consistent. It's not a trend. Black Lives Matter hashtag is not a trend. It's here to stay.
Mm-hmm. And I know we've fought for civil rights, and I know Lavinia, you being a lawyer and all, we fought for civil rights back in the 60s. And there was the law that, you know, passed that civil rights for us to be treated as equal and civil, you know, like to have our oppressors look at us civilly, you know, and with that being said, we have Black Lives Matters. You talked about training, you know, is there something that we can put in place legally that kind of helps us out here?
Yeah, so in terms of the civil rights movements in the 60s, that's the American situation, you know, of course, as a result of the great Martin Luther King. Here in Canada, our equivalent of the civil rights movement and, you know, the Bill of Rights that came to be in the United States, ours is called the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and that came about in 1982. And so the difficulty from a legal perspective, the problem is that the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms is meant to protect individuals from unfair state actions. So be it the province, be it the federal government, any type of ministry or government acting agency, so you're thinking your police, your schools, those tenets of society, you can bring a claim before the civil court, and you can argue that one of your charter rights were infringed. The issue is that, and the Charter Rights, Section 15 specifically speaks to the right to not be discriminated against on the basis of a bunch of different enumerated grounds, which is just a fancy way of saying characteristics inherent to yourself. That being, there's religion, there's sex, there's race, obviously, which is the one that applies to our conversation. And so the problem, believe it or not, since 1982, and we're now in 2020, is despite all of the racism that we see, all of the discrimination, there's never been not one case that has met the Supreme Court of Canada that challenged the whatever state action there was on the basis of race. Not one.
And why is that?
Why is that? Because the law isn't necessarily accessible to those who don't have the monies or the wherewithal to take on that type of a case. So the big law firms, any lawyer really who's doing this work needs to be paid. And, you know, it's just so much money. The filing fees are expensive. You know, just the time to do the research is expensive. The time to litigate is expensive. Even something as small as getting out to the Supreme Court of Canada is expensive. And then there's legal barriers as well, too. So if for whatever reason, the court that you're dealing with, most likely if you're trying to get to the Supreme Court of Canada with a race issue under the charter, you would have had to deal with lower level courts or lower level tribunals first. And all of those lower level courts, lower level tribunals, they're set up in a way with their own appeal processes. And you can challenge things right up to the top, but that costs money and that takes a lot of time. And so what we have instead, what I notice in my practice, a lot of people take advantage of instead, is the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario. Or if it's against a federal agency like the RCMP or Postal Canada, whatever, then they would go to the Canadian Human Rights Commission. And so there's a multitude of issues with that as well too. You know, with the Human Rights Tribunal, remedies are very limited. I think at the last time I checked, the highest financial payout from some type of a discrimination was like, I think $182,000 or something like that. And so that's not a lot of money, right?
Right.
But the great thing about the Human Rights Tribunal is it's set up as a people's court, so to speak. It's not advised that you go before the HRTO by yourself, but it is set up in a way where you can easily put together a claim, or what we call an application, because it's a tribunal, and then you can kind of get your piece there. Within the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal piece, you can do the same thing, but that process is ridiculously inadequate. You basically put your application together first. It goes before a panel to see if it has merits to be tried in the tribunal, and then they decide whether or not you get your day in court. Absolute BS. 95% of the times those cases are kicked out. And so the Canadian legal response to this stuff is lacking. It is totally lacking. It's not good. And so that's the reason why I believe we've never really seen a successful Section 15 charter argument, because like I said before, the money and the time. So I think from a legal strategy, the best bet would definitely be to come together as a class action, pool money as a class action, especially people who've been dealt with wrongly by the police. If you've even had one scenario where you've been dealt with by the police in a way that was just wrong, that's something that you can, band with other people who've also experienced a wrong, put all of your claims together, put some money together, and get it to where it needs to go. So of course it would first have to go to the Superior Court of Justice. You get whatever remedy or whatever result you have there. Then you'd have to keep on moving up the chain if you want your case to kind of get that widespread national type of that spread, like that power across the country as a whole. So
it actually sounds like we have a very, very tall uphill battle in the legal system for us to even get ahead.
Yeah.
And it almost feels like so much work for me that I could probably see 95% of Black people saying, forget it.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go that route. So I don't even know what to say at that point, because that, like, everything you just said to me sounds so discouraging.
I know.
For me as a Black person.
I mean, the silver lining is that we used to have the African Canadian Legal Clinic, which went to the Supreme Court of Canada with issues like this 25 times and was successful. We don't have it anymore, but we have something called the Black Legal Action Center. And the way they came about like last year or so, or maybe the year before, and they're doing the work to get these kinds of cases. It's very similar to the African Canadian Legal Clinic, hopefully within the Supreme Court of Canada. So if you have experienced a wrong and you don't have money, that Black Legal Action Center doesn't charge a red cent, like nothing is charged, because it's actually funded by the government. And so I always advise people, if they don't have money, to first especially, well, if you're Black, that's the audience we're talking to, to go over to the Black Legal Action Center and to, state your case. If you can't get it dealt with at the Black Legal Action Center, then your next step is to talk to somebody who has that critical race theory lens, who is a lawyer who specializes in this. So a lot of people think they can ask any lawyer any question. Unfortunately, our law is so complex that we all are specialized. And so don't ask me anything about real estate law, because I have no clue. That's not my area. But you can ask me about this stuff. There's a guy he was the director of legal services over at the African Canadian Legal Clinic. His name's Donardo Jones. Fantastic, phenomenal lawyer. I would definitely advise, if you wanted to do something like that, like a class action, take it up to the Supreme Court of Canada. He would be your guy to do so. He has his own law firm, and he's just fantastic. He's already won he's been a part of winning cases before the Supreme Court of Canada. And so that's an actionable step forward, because there's not a lack of people who've been wrongfully dealt with by any government agency. We have so many, right? So don't be discouraged. Don't be discouraged. It's a long walk. It's a long uphill, but I think we can do it. I really do.
And that's the plan. And I want to thank you for providing that information, because I mean, it takes a lot for us to gather all the information and get educated ourselves, so we know the right actions and resources that we do have, because I don't feel that as a community we know where to turn I don't think we know our rights and our laws. I don't think we know where we can go to get a loan, or who we can talk to for advice to even draw up a proposal, or anything like that. So I'm not saying everybody doesn't know, but I think a lot of us don't know. And I think you are right, Ray, when you say we have to have more of these conversations so that everybody can be uplifted and understand the methodology behind this whole madness of what's going on today and how we can get ahead. So if I can ask, so if I'll ask you guys this one thing, what would be your advice to your friends, your peers, or even your friends of non-Black color for the next wave of movement of helping us get ahead? What would be your advice? And I'll start with you, Jonathan.
All right, okay, on the spot. I say honestly, I'm like, keep that same energy. Like seriously, the aspect, especially for non-Black friends and stuff like that, just the fact that people are actually educating themselves and learning more speaks volumes. Because the more for me personally speaking, I feel like the more people know, the more they're aware, and the better they can actually come up with solutions as well too. Because when you have people from different backgrounds and also different platforms or different privileged lifestyles and stuff like that, they have more access to certain things. So there's certain things that we in the back community might not even be aware of, that they have access that we don't, then you can actually utilize that network to make the change that you want to see. So being able to actually learn more and educate yourself more, being able to actually understand the history of the country that you're in and understand how the system exactly works gives you a better advantage. And being able to actually, again, like you were mentioning before, within the back of me as well, just learning the laws and regulations of your country. Like knowing that stuff is very important, because the moment you know, if you do get stopped or anything like that, you already know exactly what your rights are, so that you can actually protect yourself from being accused of something that you didn't do. And like for me, I'm like speaking in terms of like, I'm an immigrant to Canada. So I used to live in the US beforehand, and before that I lived in Haiti. So there are certain things, especially within the laws of Canada, I wasn't aware of either. And so when I heard Lavinia talking, I'm like, oh my, I'm like, do people even know this exists? Because I had no idea. So I'm like, usually, especially in legal terms and stuff as well too. So I feel like knowledge is power in a lot of these situations. If you are not putting in the work to educate yourself more and more, you're really going to be losing out, and it's going to be a losing battle at this point. So we really have to take that moment, and especially within this whole entire quarantine situation, to really read up on the rules and regulations of the country you live in, read up about the history regarding Black people and systemic racism in the countries in the US and Canada and stuff as well too, and understand what the problem is, where to tackle it, and exactly how to make the changes you want to see in the society you live in as well too.
Well said, sir. Ray, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I totally echo Jonathan's thoughts on this. It's all about education. And, you know, some of my best friends are not Black. And, you know, I've had to have those conversations with them. You need to go into your spaces, your families and your friends. And when you start hearing them saying negative things about the Black community, re-educate them. Talk about me. Talk about, you know, my sister and my family. Let them know that we're not criminals. Because these ideologies, they are, you know, shared amongst groups and cultures. So it does take a lot of educating. And, you know, it's so funny. I had a sit down with two of my closest friends who are not Black. And I went through, and it's so funny, they were shooting history back at me about the Black community. I was really impressed. So they took their time out to research on their own. And I was saying, you know what, it's challenging. I understand that, you know, you come from an ethnic background, you are a person of color, but don't compare your story to mine. We have two different histories, because that's what happens, is that we have the Asian community and then we have the South Asian community saying, well, I go through my struggles and discrimination too. Yes, I appreciate that. I understand. But our histories are so different. You know, we were enslaved, and our ancestors were enslaved, and they were brought to this country. Yours wasn't. So we're going to be on two different playing grounds here. And so one thing that I also want to say is that when people say, okay, let's push for equality, it's equity that we should be pushing for, because then it appreciates our differences as well. And that's just one thing that I want to encourage people to do. Like Jonathan says, just keep educating yourself. filter out the noise, because there's a lot of noise, even coming from our own community. I mean, I heard this one lady talking a couple of weeks ago about such negative things about the Black community. And it's just like, people that don't really connect with us or interact with us, they might hear that and believe it. And so it takes somebody to go in with some analytical skills and start to filter out and saying, okay, that doesn't make sense, but this makes sense. And, you know, you will be surprised. There are people from other communities that really want to see us win. Yeah. You know, they really are pushing for us to be at the forefront. Not everybody's bad, and we have to understand that. There are good people out there that are truly looking for us to win because they're tired of it, because they know that there is good in our community.
Lavinia, final thoughts?
Yeah, so many great points. I don't even know where to begin. You know, something that you said, Duke, that I really wanted to kind of return to in addition to this question is the piece about the money and, you know, all of the training that Ray was talking about. And I think that like an actionable step forward for us to take advantage of those funds, I really want to, I guess, you know, bring it back to that training. The training is so important. Even, you know, Jonathan was mentioning the education piece, or, you know, as we in education like to call it, the educative piece. Like, you really need to have that piece in there. And so for us to kind of dismantle this thing, I think that there's a place for everybody to, you know, find those corporations that are offering those funds to do that training. Because people, what I'm understanding from the other side of the conversation, and I've had this conversation with, you know, the superintendents at the board, I've had it with the director of education, like, we've had these conversations, I've held them to task, and, you know, people are just afraid to like not get it right. Like, they're just afraid. And so I think there's such a beautiful opportunity for, number one, the Black community to get some good work done, to train people and educate them on how to treat us right and how to, you know, get this thing right, because it's not easy. The history that we've all inherited, whether you are enjoying white privilege or you're on the other end like us, being oppressed, like none of us are particularly individually responsible for slavery. Like, none of us are. We weren't alive then, right? And so we're all just kind of trying to figure this thing out. And I think that those funds, we really need to use that to help people do what's right. A lot of people out there, like Ray said, they want to do right. There are good people out there. They want to figure this out. And not only are we, you know, taking advantage of the opportunity to educate, but we're also taking advantage of the opportunity to bring money into the Black community and to build out the Black community even more. And we can only do good things with that. So I'll kind of leave that long-winded answer there, but I think it's the training piece. And I also really think it's the litigation piece too. For far too long, we're subjected to victimization at the hands of the police, subjected to victimization at the hands of the bank, at the hands of healthcare, at the hands of, you know, housing. Like, it's just, it never ends, right? And so I really think that we need to, like, a way to mobilize it from a legal perspective, and the one that I have is for a bunch of us to come together and do a class action against the police. I think a class action could go far. I haven't seen any yet, but I think that could be a really strong way to get through on the Section 15 issue and to get some real money into the Black community. As a class action, if you win, those funds are then dispersed to whoever identifies as a part of that class action, not necessarily only the person who was in the litigation directly, but whoever falls under that class. So I think this is a strategy. We can percolate on it further if we're serious about it. I'm happy to chat even more, but I guess I'll just leave it there because you guys know I could talk forever.
No, it's really important that we get this information out, and from a legal side, I've learned a lot today. So I appreciate you, because I a lot of the stuff that you said, I had no idea even existed. And for me personally, I love doing what I do. I love getting down to the nitty gritty and really unplugging the truth, what we need to do as a Black community. Because, and I'll end it like this. For once in my life, I want to be on the winning side and not oppressed anymore. And even though we weren't born in slavery, we still feel the pressures and the impact of it in different ways, because the physical abuse that our ancestors took, that might have been the easiest part, because the mental slavery that we're going through is just undeniably terrible. And to watch my children go through certain things. For myself, I went through certain things when I was growing up. I went to an all white school. I was called nigger all the time, and it was a terrible feeling. And that's a whole part of that mental slavery, where you kind of look at yourself and like, am I not worthy? Right? And now we're rising up, and I'm afraid that with people who live with privilege are going to fight back and resist. But I say this to all of my Black brothers and sisters: even if they resist, keep your head up high, keep pushing, because we will rise, and this time we will win. I want to thank you guys for being on the show today. I really appreciate you guys for doing this. Ray, keep doing what you're doing. The good fight is there. Keep talking to your friends. Keep protesting. Keep channeling your Black strength. Jonathan, again, you've lived so many different lives, from Haiti to America to Canada, learning different things, learning different laws, and to see the passion that you bring, I appreciate you. And Olivia, again, keep fighting that fight with the law. Keep teaching us. Again, you're always welcome. All of you guys are always welcome back on the show, but keep teaching and keep fighting. And thank you guys for a great episode.
Thank you.
So much, Duke.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a good night.
This has been another episode of Duke Robinson Presents Unplugged. I want to thank everybody for being a part of my journey, and we'll talk again. Have a great night, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.